welcome to our very first ever live stream performance. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday evening, and for those of you joining us for the first time, we are Aliro Voices. We're a Twin Cities-based chamber choir with a focus on lesser performed works and new music. And we've got some of the latter for you tonight. We're fortunate to have several composers in the group, and tonight's piece was written by one of them, one of our tenors, Michael Maiorana. Michael writes great music, and we've performed and premiered several of his works in the past, and so when he brought up the opportunity to work with the group and write a larger piece, I was very excited to do so. Of course, the first time we talked about this was months before COVID was a thing, and the project has definitely had to evolve over that time. And so it's a little different than we originally thought it was going to look, but we're still very excited to share it with you tonight. Tonight's performance is one way for us to continue making music in a world that doesn't allow choirs to gather in person. We're calling this a live remote performance. So just like you, all of our performers tonight are scattered across the Twin Cities, various other places, and they're also performing remotely. So they're in their living rooms, practice rooms, kitchens. But again, another way for us to continue making music together. We can see each other and we can hear each other, but due to the nature of the internet, there is some delay involved here, which would normally be a problem since choral music relies on careful synchronization of all of our parts and all of our consonants. However, Michael has done a brilliant job of writing a piece that not only takes that into account, but also utilizes it to create a different texture. So I'm going to hand things off to him now. He'll tell you a little bit about the project and the text and what the piece is all about.
Yeah, and the programs we're using a separate program for video and audio. Video we're using Zoom, and audio we're using CleanFeed. So you might notice a little bit of a discrepancy between those, and that's just what we're doing here. But yeah, the piece, it's using a text. The text is part of a speech given by Harry Hopkins in 1936. Harry Hopkins was the director of the Works Progress Administration and Secretary of Commerce under FDR, and one of FDR's top diplomats in foreign policy, just an interesting person. But this speech is largely about social welfare, dignity in social welfare, society's imperative to care for all its members. So it felt like a very vital text to work with in our world generally, but once the pandemic started, it has more significance in particular with the massive unemployment going on, relief packages being passed or not passed by Congress. So it felt like a very vital text to work with. And then working in this medium also felt very timely and resonant. Just this is the way that we can sing together at the moment. So I'm really happy to be working with Aliro on this project. They've been very generous collaborators, and it's a piece that's open to a lot of interpretation. And the singers have really dug into that, and Kurt with the conducting. And some thank yous. Thanks to Ian, one of our singers, for making the graphic that was on the YouTube event and the Facebook event. Thanks, Ian. And C4 Ensemble is a choir that has been doing these live streamed concerts. So I really took a lot of inspiration and kind of logistics and thinking about how this would work from them, and the resources that they have generously provided. And yeah, thanks to ACF. This is a project funded by an ACF Create grant, ACF Create 2020 grant. And it wouldn't be possible without them. So thanks to the American Composers Forum for this grant. This project wouldn't be possible without the grant from the American Composers Forum, with funds provided by the Jerome Foundation. And yeah, Kurt, if you have anything to add.
Just to reiterate what Michael said, like this text is very, very relevant today. There's a link to the text in the description stream. I'd encourage you to follow along if possible. It seemed relevant when I read the text when he originally pitched the product, but again, the events of the past 6 months have really brought home the necessity of this, and it says a lot about our obligations to each other and to society and how we treat each other as fellow human beings, which feels very relevant today. We'll also be hosting a short question and answer session afterward. If you have any questions or comments, type them in the stream chat, and we'll get to those after we get done with the performance. If you want to stick around for that, great. And last, if you feel you can spare any money to support Aliro in future projects like this, there is also a link to a Venmo and a PayPal in the description. We're a volunteer organization. All of the money that you donate goes to either purchasing music, booking venues, or creating collaborations such as these. So I know everyone's kind of tight on the budget at the moment, but arts organizations could use a little help too. So if you have any to spare, we'd really appreciate it. That's all I've got. So let's get started. Enjoy the show.
his decisions fast. People were hungry, 22 million of them in the United States. You would have had to decide who should and who should not get relief. Would you give relief to everybody that knocked on the door and asked for it? Would you make an investigation of their need? And what kind of investigation? Investigators that these people had never seen in their lives would go in and ask whether they had an insurance policy. How far behind they were on their rent. Did they have any relatives? If a man had had an insurance policy for $200, would you make him cash it in? If he had $100 in his savings bank, every dime he had, would he have to take it out and spend it? Before you gave him relief. to knock on the door, and why should
It is no fault of their own that they are out of work. And it is the business of society to take care of them. It shouldn't be done as an act of would have had to decide about 560,000 white-collar men. You would have had to decide what kind of work you were going to give them. Would you make them suffer? Would you make them suffer? Would you? Put them out in a ditch? out in a ditch with a pickaxe? Would you put them out in a ditch with a pickaxe and make them like it? Musicians and actors. We decided to take the skills of these people wherever we found them, and to put them to work to save their skills when the public wanted them. Sure, we put musicians into orchestras. Sure, we let artists paint. It was all right for the great foundations to give fellowships to artists. But when the United States government did it, because these fellows were busted and broke, it became a waste of money. There must have been some men or women in this town who have put up money for a great orchestra. Now we have been doing the same things when the arts no longer have a patron. There must have been some men or women in this town who have put up some money for a great orchestra. Now we have been doing the same things when the arts no longer have a patron. There must have been some men or women in this town who have put up money for a great orchestra. Now we have been doing the same things when the arts no longer have a patron.
I think it is an outrage that we should permit hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to be ill-clad, to live in miserable homes, not to have enough to eat, not to be able to send their children to school, for the only reason that they are poor. I don't believe ever again in America are we going to permit the things to happen that have happened in the past to people.
We are never going back again, in my opinion, to the days of putting the old people in the almshouses, when a decent, dignified pension at home will keep them there. We are coming to the day when we are going to have decent houses for the poor, when there is genuine and real security for everybody. I think it is an outrage that we should permit hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to be ill-clad, to live in miserable homes, not to have enough to eat, not to be able to send their children to school for the only reason that they are poor. I don't believe ever again in America are we going to permit things to happen that have happened in the past to people. We are never going back again, in my opinion, to the days of putting the old people in the almshouses, when a decent, dignified pension at home will keep them there. We are coming to the day when we are going to have decent houses for the poor, when there's genuine and real security for everybody.
Coming to the day when we are going to have decent houses for the poor, when there is genuine and real security for everybody. I have gone all over the moral hurdles that people are poor because they are bad. I don't believe it. We are coming to the day. We are coming to the day. We are coming to the day.
kind of a job I have had for the last 3.5 years, and still have. I don't know whether you would have liked the job. Of the government. When it is all over, when it is all over, when it is all over, the thing I am going to be proudest of, the thing I am going to be proudest of, are the people all over America, people all over public officials, volunteers, trade workers, thousands of people of all political and religious faiths. Would
Thanks again so much for listening, and again, feel free to stick around for the question and answer session we have after the stream here.
Thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, we'll jump into a question and answer session. So you've found the chat, some of you have found the chat. Feel free to type in any questions you have there. And before then, a question I have for the singers is, what was the hardest part of putting this together for any of you?
I have one. Setting aside that everything has to be together all the time perfectly.
Yeah.
It was, the whole thing was just like an anxiety attack for me.
Yeah, because to be on time with other people, you have to be ahead of them when you're singing. They'll be behind you in your ears, just for the internet.
Well, and when we started, it felt very chaotic because of that. But as we grew and learned the piece, it felt more like it was meant to be.
It's like all the extra equipment with like the cords and the microphones and just the stuff that you usually don't have to think about. So like you're not just learning your music, you're also like monitoring all this stuff.
That was a huge part of the work for this. It was just the stuff. But
Yeah, Michael's super great about being online, or just like, hey, if you want to just drop into the internet for a minute and like
drop into the internet.
chest levels on your mic, because I was having problems with mine, but then we got it figured out, and now it just works. So
Yeah, it was a neat obstacle to overcome. Learned a lot, for sure. There's a question here. How did I come across the text? It's something that at some point I was just kind of aware that, like, I was looking for public domain texts, but at a certain point you want to start looking at public domain texts after 1922 or whatever, and now it's scooting forward finally. But one of the things that is public domain are court transcripts and things prepared by federal officials in the course of their duties. So a speech by a federal official would be public domain, so I could work with this text. And that's an idea I first came across working with John Romerheim at Grinnell College. We looked at what did I fight for at Omaha Beach. I should have looked that up before. But something about Omaha Beach, a piece that sets a court transcript. So that's something I was interested in looking for. And then Grinnell also, Harry Hopkins was a graduate of Grinnell, 1912 graduate, so 100 years before I graduated from there. So it was someone who was on my radar. A house was named after him, and people talked about him at our graduation. So I looked around for a speech by him and had this kind of rattling in the back of my mind for about 4 years, and then applied for the ACF grant with Aliro a year ago, and then finally started setting it to music about 4 months ago. So yeah. What inspired your chordal choices, especially fluctuating between major and minor centers? That's a good question. One of the things was so moving from one chord to the next, they were going to overlap in most of the cases. Some of the movements had kind of isolated chordal silos, but in a lot of the movements there were overlapping things, so it was figuring out a kind of modal thing or like pandiatonic kind of idea that we could move through with like blurred edges and not have it be too abrasive. And that's just a language that I like working with anyway. Any other questions? Another question I had for the singers, did you have any moments that stood out to you or any pieces that stood out to you?
let me find one.
I loved the bass and tenor solo. At the end of that, I had chills. It's just very meaningful, and it was one of my favorites.
I personally like the end of the last movement there, when everyone gets to kind of decide how they want to interpret that last bit about being tremendously proud of this country and to be a citizen of it. It just kind of can mean something different to a lot of different people. So the singers all have pitch choices that they can make there, kind of on their own, at their own discretion. They can choose from a set of pitches. So they can kind of interpret that line rhythmically, tonally, timbrally, but then also pitch-wise and how they are in relation to everyone else, if they want to make that a more harmonious chord or a more dissonant chord. Was something I kind of enjoyed hearing everyone's takes on.
And we talked about this in previous rehearsals, but since we're working with such a small group, this is half the choir that we normally have, just for logistical purposes. It seemed better to have a smaller group. But But it's so cool in the end there to hear all the different individual voices popping out of the texture and like knowing who those voices belong to, and it like it's rare in choir to have something where like your individual voice is like the one supporting that entire role instead of the larger section. So it's very cool for us to work in this setting, which is a smaller group.
A clarification in the comments from John Ramrheim. The piece is called "What Do You Think I Fought For at Omaha Beach" by Melissa Dunphy. Great piece. Question: is this piece ultimately hopeful, mournful, or something in between? Is neat. That's a neat question. I feel like it's probably something in between, and there are those moments when when the singers have a chance to interpret it as one or the other more. I'd say somewhere in between for sure, and depending on the day, especially. I don't know. What a challenge to maintain levels during the piece. Were you mixing levels during the performance? What program were you using? So for the audio, we're using CleanFeed, which is a free program. I recommend everyone checking it out. And if you get the pro version at either $22 or $36 a month, you can mix everyone's levels individually. I think that's something you need the pro version for. And everyone can mix their own levels, but I, as the host of this CleanFeed server, can mix everyone's levels individually. So I was just kind of scooting around, which is tricky to have, like, I don't know. In a regular choral setting, we could just listen to each other, and then it would happen. And we are listening to each other, but like just to have that in the moment, minute kind of shifts compared to the people next to you, it's a little bit harder here. And I didn't write any dynamics in the piece, so Kurt's shaping a lot of stuff. But then when things have to kind of balance with each other more, that's something that's up to interpretation. But then also, if I have a feeling about it, I can kind of scoot it around in CleanFeed. So CleanFeed is the program in browser. There's nothing to download. You just go there, cleanfeed.net. They're great.
Michael also wrote it in a way that the dynamics just sort of suggest themselves at certain times, like that phrase just wants to have a crescendo in it, and just like when the range increases, or he put some syllables in the interludes where we didn't have text, and that's sort of a manual dynamic way of changing just by opening your mouth more or closing it. So.
Yeah,
there's lots of different ways to accomplish that.
There's a question for Kurt. Was conducting through video chat more difficult, and was that why you counted using your fingers? Is that specific to conducting virtually rather than in person?
Sure. So it was very different. I've never had so much of a lag between myself and the musicians I'm working with. And so I have to know that no matter where I am in my pattern, like I just have to keep going. I can't wait for the sound. I'm not really reacting to what I'm hearing in the way I would if the musicians were in the room with me, which is very different. All the little numbers are part of how the piece is organized. So because we know that we're not going to sync up at every time, this piece is more event-based. So like you'll have your staff of music and like a little box 1 over it. And then at some point I choose to go to box 2, and people, once they complete their line, move on to the next figure. Which is how we get a really interesting overlapping texture and a lot of interesting like chords kind of moving and overlapping over each other. And that happens sometimes in more modern music, but this is the first time that's had to happen because of the system that we're using. It was both like a feature and an interesting thing to toy around with as we move the piece forward.
Yeah, and if anyone is curious what the score looks like, feel free to email me. I think I put my email in the video description, and I'll send that along to you. I'll have it on my website soon, but it's kind of in a draft state. I'm thankful that Aliro was so generous in their collaboration that I could send them kind of new versions every week up until I think last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. But the last like big version change was I think August 15th or 16th. But then a little tiny changes after that. So thank you, Aliro, again for that.
Mm-hmm. And I will say part of that overlapping effect, and this is tying kind of back to the question about whether the piece is overall hopeful or mournful or somewhere in between. And Michael said that it, to some extent, kind of depends on the day. And partially that's interpretation, but then also partially that is just kind of the chance of how the chords overlap, which is one of my favorite parts of the piece.
Yeah, not everything is intentional. So it's created in a way that like it's okay for things to happen against each other, but it's not always the way that you were planning for them to happen against each other.
which makes every performance like a singular thing. Like it's never going to be performed the exact same way again. And also in choral music, I feel like this is a fairly rare thing. Has anyone sung a piece that's like not deterministic like this before? I know I've never conducted one before, but it's great to be able to work with this in the choral setting too.
Yeah, it's not as common for choir as instrumental.
I've sung pieces where there's like an overall, it's a traditional piece, but then all of a sudden and Renee Clausen does this like a lot, it's kind of his thing, but it'll be like the men will be singing just chords, and the chords will change in a specific time, vary together, and then on top of that, the women, the alto 2-1, soprano 2-1, each have their own separate phrases, and then one person will like sing the soprano one thing once, and then it'll like be, other people will come in whenever they want, and it just like ends up being a cacophony. And that's the only time I've ever heard, because like his piece, Clausen's piece, All That Hath Life and Breath, Praise Ye the Lord or something, does a very similar thing to what Michael has done.
I'll check it out.
But that's the only time I've really seen it.
Or like Immortal Bach,
And it's
but
super
that's
cool.
actually not. That's actually very planned out, but it's the same sort of effect.
Yeah, no, the Renee Clausen one, it literally says in the music like, come in when you want and sing it at whatever tempo you want, and it's like the first time I encountered it was in high school, and we had to assign people to come in because everyone was so nervous about like being alone or like making a clash by accident. And it's like when you have singers like this that are experienced and they can hold their own part and stuff, it makes a lot more sense.
I was going to make that same point, how lovely it was to work with all the people who are willing to take a risk like this and like are confident on their parts and like can make that texture happen. So
I found
it's
myself
fun.
specifically looking for dissonant moments and like, okay, what note am I gonna end on? What's the chord around me? I'm gonna do this.
Yeah. She's your own best.
I hope more choral music is composed in this way, because it's really important for singers to learn how to let go and learn. You almost compose a piece yourself as you go, and that's not the case in ensemble music. But it's really important. Actually, I find this is more like singing early music, where you're given liberties, or when it's like chant or psalmody or some of the early types of music that we are trained to perform. It reminds me more of that.
Yeah, in a solo sense at least, where you're then piling it all on top of itself.
And the kind of acoustic too, of like singing in a. This is a digital space, a digital cathedral with its limitations. Just like that music was written for a different acoustic that had to account for it. It's very fun to explore.
Another comment here. So great, Kurt is a rock star. I agree. What is the first thing you want to sing or create once you can be back in person with each other? That's a good question up for anyone.
Oh boy.
Well, we had a concert planned for June 2020, so we'll probably just jump into that again.
There was a lot of good music.
I was very excited for that program and very sad that we had to put aside the rest of the season. I mean, obviously, like it was the right call to make.
Yeah.
But,
my favorite one was the Eschenwald star. Not stars, swans.
Swans.
But stars is the good one.
I know, but I think Swans is better
It was really nice.
than stars.
Yeah, I like that
Fight
one.
me.
I'll have to look it up.
I guess I can speak for myself just as the conductor of this group. Like, there's no piece that I'm looking forward to, but I'm just looking forward to like being in the same room as other people and making music again.
Yeah.
It's like nothing beats it, and you can do music on your own and you can do soloist stuff, but at the end of the day, being there with other people and like sharing that experience, like physically as well as mentally, it's a great thing.
And that's
you can hear too. It's in this space, like it's hard to hear the other parts just because of the digital. When you're in a room, there's the vibrations of the voices and the sounds, and you're connecting on a different level.
It's really, I don't want to be like pessimistic, but it's just really not satisfying. Like, I don't look forward to these rehearsals. Like, I really look forward. Not but like I love the piece. I love the piece. I love the text. Like, there's so much great about it. But the way that I like look forward to in-person choir rehearsals is just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and I've found this to be a nice, well, I don't know. I'm not personally interested in doing all of the virtual choirs where everyone records their tracks individually. And there is something here, this live aspect of these rehearsals and performances, it is very different, and in a good way. Like I find this to be something I do look forward to it, but that's just a difference in maybe interest in these things. But,
yeah, like it scratches some itch for me. It's not the same itch as like in-person choir, but it does something else cool.
Yeah.
For me, it's accessibility, because like people can just watch it anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is,
and people could perform
a lot of
it
times
anywhere.
getting people to come to concerts is hard, because there's a lot of choirs in Minnesota, and people, and so getting people to come to concerts, but this people can just watch, and that's my favorite part about it, is just accessibility.
Yeah,
I normally can't hear stuff like this.
I'm interested to see how it kind of shapes collaboration as people keep trying these kinds of experiments and doing these things, trying these new mediums of live remote things. That choirs could be anywhere. They don't have to be in the same place anymore. Performers could be collaborating from anywhere, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that it's live, because I agree with you. The virtual choirs make it a really great product at the end of it, but it's, if you make a mistake, you press pause and you go back. Where this is like, if I lose my place in the score, it's like I'm really performing. It's
Right.
You have a real, which
There's
is an
stakes
important
involved.
thing. There's real stakes.
Yeah, like I was getting that pre-concert adrenaline a little bit at like 7:28.
Yep.
Just like I was actually there.
And we are tuning with each other. There's a question here about the latency from John in CleanFeed. So if you click on the little like gear or something, it says 30 milliseconds or something, but it seems like the latency is about half a second or something like that. On bad days, it was like 5 to 10 seconds as we were like figuring out the tech stuff still.
Yep.
We have most people wired to Ethernet to make the connection just more stable. And that helps. I'm hosting the CleanFeed session, and I'm wired into a pretty good internet source. So yeah, on our good days, on our when things are working out well, like half a second, it's not so bad. So we are still kind of like tuning with each other, still getting feedback in almost real time from each other. You just can't count on listening for where you're supposed to be if you're trying to be with each other. So we're watching Kurt. I wasn't singing, but everyone else is watching Kurt.
Well, it was really interesting. It was really interesting to have one person live in my ear,
Sure.
and then
I was going to ask you guys about that.
yeah.
What did you guys notice? How was that for you guys? Or what did you think?
I would say that sometimes we synced up more than I think necessarily we did with everybody else, and sometimes I was purposely kind of ignoring her so that we could blend with everybody else and be kind of the same bit of slightly off as everybody else.
Yeah. You always hear the tenor part.
There's another question in here just about other platforms. Have you considered Jamulus or Jacktrip? Any sense how they compare? I tried Jamulus, and we tried Jamulus with a couple people. It took a little longer to set up, following the instructions from C4, which are very detailed and excellent. Setting up a remote server in Google Cloud Platform and getting that going took a little bit of time. And then once we had it going, it didn't seem to me like very much better audio quality or audio controls. There's a little more, maybe a lot more. There are more controls in Jamulus than you have in CleanFeed, but you have what you need, I think, in CleanFeed. We had what we needed in CleanFeed, and the audio quality that I could hear in Jamulus didn't seem much better. But I didn't explore it too deeply. But we were already we started with CleanFeed, and we just kind of kept going with it, and it worked out. And I haven't tried Jacktrip. I don't know about that one. Another question, why did you choose a violin versus, say, a cello for the accompanying instrument? Part of it is availability of performers, because I live with Mandy, she's my partner, and plays violin and viola, so that was another choice I had. But went with violin. Originally, I had written it for 2 instruments that were meant to be in the same place so that they could line up with each other. But that just seemed like it was going to add too many logistical challenges schedule-wise, and then also if other choirs were to perform this in the future, to necessitate that 2 performers had to be in the same place and play specific instruments seemed limiting. So I just went with violin. And was this recorded? Will it be available for viewing? It'll be available at the same link that it's streamed at. It'll just be there forever. Or, yeah.
Until the end of time.
Till the end of time, yeah. So yeah, it'll be there.
That's a cool accessibility thing too, because if like you can't be there at the time, you can just watch it whenever the heck you want.
Yeah, I don't see any more. There's a 10-second delay, I think, between when I'm talking and when it appears in the chat. I don't see any more questions, but I'll give you 10 seconds if you want to write anything more in the chat. Otherwise, yeah, I think we'll close up shop here pretty soon at the end of these 10 seconds.
Which are happening next.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us
watching.
in this digital
We
performance
appreciate
space.
you.
Yeah.
Well, you're
Cool to
fun.
interact also with that live chat. That's not something, I mean, you can mill around with the performers afterwards and kind of ask individually, but this is I don't know. It's not so bad to have this kind of like typed up chat thing
It's
responding
like
to
an
it.
easy setup panel.
Yeah. Pretty
Yeah.
Logistics.
It's like a CLE,
good. Oh, what?
A what?
continuing legal education.
Oh boy. For all you legal buffs out there.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, if you want to follow along with the links in the description, there's the full speech there. There's also the excerpted speech of the words that we sang. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.